A little girl was being hurt by a psychopath. Old man on her way home. Then a Hell's Angel stepped in. The sun had barely cleared the tree line when Ellie Mae Walker opened her eyes. She lay still for a moment, listening. The old farmhouse always had something to say in the mornings. The floorboards creaked when the wind pushed against the walls. The windows rattled in their frames. A loose shutter somewhere out back tapped a slow, uneven beat against the weathered wood siding. But this morning, she was listening for something else. She heard it from the next room. A thin, wet cough. Then quiet. Then another. Ellie sat up. She was small for 6, with dark brown hair that curled at the ends, and eyes the color of warm honey. She slept in an old quilt her grandmother had stitched together before she was born. The fabric had faded to soft browns and yellows, and she pulled it up to her chin for just one more second before swinging her bare feet onto the cold floor. She padded across the hall in her socks and pushed open her mother's door without a sound. Eleanor Walker lay propped against 2 pillows, a damp cloth resting on her forehead. Her face was pale. Her cheeks had a shine to them that Ellie did not like. She had looked this way for 11 days now. Ellie had been counting. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Mama, she whispered. Eleanor's eyes opened slowly. She smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. Morning, baby girl, she said, her voice low and rough like gravel underwater. Ellie climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand in both of hers. Eleanor's fingers were cool and thin. You feel hot again, Ellie said. I'm all right. Her mother squeezed her hand. Did you sleep okay? Ellie nodded, even though she had woken up twice. She did not say that part. Eleanor turned her head toward the window. The glass was fogged at the corners from the cold, but pale golden light was pushing through. Her expression shifted. Something careful moved behind her eyes. Ellie Mae, she said gently. I need to talk to you about today. Ellie straightened up. She already knew what was coming somehow. She was good at reading her mother's voice the way other kids read picture books. We're nearly out of the broth, Eleanor said, and the medicine is almost gone. I've got maybe one more dose left in the bottle. I know, Ellie said quietly. I checked last night. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across her face that Ellie could not name. It looked like love and something sad all mixed together. I need you to go to the market in town, her mother said. I wrote a list. She pointed to the small folded paper on the nightstand. Bread, soup broth, and the fever medicine, the same kind as before. Mr. Henley behind the pharmacy counter knows it. Just tell him it's for me. Ellie picked up the list and opened it carefully. The handwriting was shakier than it used to be, but she could still read it fine. I put the coins in the blue jar on the kitchen shelf, Eleanor added. Count them before you go. Make sure it's enough. I will. Her mother reached out and touched her cheek. Stay on the main road, you hear me? Don't cut through the fields. Straight to town and straight back home. Yes, Mama. And don't talk to anybody you don't know. I won't. Eleanor settled back into her pillow. The cough came again, harder this time. Ellie waited until it passed, then pulled the quilt up higher around her mother's shoulders. I'll be back before lunch, Ellie said. She said it the way grown-ups say things, steady and sure, like a promise you mean to keep. Her mother smiled again. I know you will. Ellie folded the list and tucked it into her dress pocket. She went to the kitchen, counted every coin in the blue jar twice, and put them in a small cloth pouch that she tied tight at the top. She ate half a piece of bread standing at the counter, because there was not much left, and she wanted to save it. Then she laced up her shoes, stepped out into the cool morning air, and started down the long dirt road toward town. The market was loud and warm, and full of the smell of fresh bread and pine cleaner. It sat at the center of the small village, a low building with wide wooden steps out front, and handwritten sale signs taped in the windows. Farmers came and went with crates. A woman in an apron swept the front porch. Two old men sat on a bench near the door and talked about the weather. Ellie moved through it all with quiet purpose. She found the bread first, a full loaf, soft in the middle, wrapped in white paper. She set it gently in the paper bag the clerk handed her. Then the soup broth, 2 small cans, cool and heavy in her hands. She carried them to the pharmacy counter at the back, where Mr. Henley stood sorting small bottles on a shelf. "For my mama," she said, and told him the name of the medicine the same way her mother had told her. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. He was a round man with a kind face and a gray mustache that drooped at the corners. "How's your mother doing?" he asked, reaching for the right bottle without looking. "She's getting better," Ellie said. It was what she always said. He set the medicine on the counter. Ellie opened her pouch and counted out the coins one by one, pressing each one flat on the countertop, her lips moving slightly as she went. When she was done, the amount was exactly right. Not 1 coin more. Mr. Henley watched her. He did not rush her. "You tell her we're thinking of her," he said, pushing the bottle toward her. "I will," Ellie said. She tucked the medicine in the bag between the bread and the soup cans so it would not rattle around. She folded the top of the bag down once, then gripped it with both arms held against her chest. Then she walked back through the busy market, down the wide wooden steps, and out into the late morning sun. The road home stretched out ahead of her, long and quiet, and lined on both sides with tall, thin trees that swayed just slightly in the breeze. The dirt was pale and dry beneath her shoes. Ellie started walking. The road stretched long and pale in both directions. Ellie walked the center of it, her shoes scuffing soft against the dry dirt. The paper bag pressed against her chest. She held it with both arms, careful and steady, the way she'd been holding it since she left the market. The town was already behind her. She could not hear it anymore. No wagon wheels, no voices, no screen doors banging shut. Just the open road and the wide sky above it, and the tall grass on either side that stood perfectly still in the midday heat. Too still. The breeze that had been with her at the start of the walk had stopped somewhere back near the last house on the edge of town. Since then, nothing moved. The grass did not sway. The tree branches up ahead did not stir. Even the air felt thick, like the kind of heat that presses down on your shoulders and makes every step feel heavier than the last. Ellie kept walking. She focused on the road. She counted her steps the way she sometimes did when something felt hard. 1, 2, 3. The bag was not too heavy. She had carried it before. She could do this. A bird had been calling somewhere off to the left when she first turned onto this stretch of road. A bright, quick little sound. She had noticed it without thinking much about it. But now, it was quiet. She slowed just slightly, without meaning to, and listened. Nothing. She started walking again. The grass on either side rose up past her shoulders in places, thick and yellowed from the dry summer. It crowded close to the road's edge, leaving only a narrow dirt path that cut straight through like a pale ribbon. The trees further up ahead leaned over from both sides, their branches touching in the middle and making a low tunnel of shade. It should have looked pretty, the kind of road you see on a calendar or a postcard. Instead, it looked like a place where things went quiet on purpose. Ellie shifted the bag in her arms and walked a little faster. She thought about her mother, about getting home and setting the bread on the counter and measuring out the right amount of medicine into the little plastic cup. She thought about how her mother's eyes would look when she came through the door, relieved and soft and grateful. She held that picture in her mind and kept moving. Then she heard something. It was not loud. It was barely anything at all. A sound like a boot shifting on dry ground. Off to the right, somewhere back in the grass. Ellie's feet slowed. She did not turn her head right away. She kept her eyes forward on the tunnel of shade ahead. Her heart had picked up its pace, beating faster and harder than the walk alone should have made it. She told herself it was an animal, a rabbit maybe, or one of the old farm dogs from the Gruber place that sometimes wandered this stretch of road looking for scraps. She told herself that, but her feet did not believe it. She walked a few more steps. Her shoes felt loud now on the dry dirt. Her breathing felt loud. Everything about her felt too loud and too visible, like standing in the middle of a field with no fence and no cover and nowhere to go. The sound came again. Closer this time. A slow, deliberate crunch of dry grass, pressing down under something heavier than a rabbit. Something with weight and intention. Something that was not in a hurry, because it did not need to be. Ellie stopped. She stood very still in the middle of the pale road, the bag pressed hard against her chest, and she stared straight ahead at the low canopy of branches that made the light go dark and green and shadowed. Her skin had gone cold despite the heat. She knew, the way children sometimes know things without being able to explain how, that something was watching her, and it had been watching her for a while. He stepped out from a narrow gap in the grass, like he had been standing there the whole time. No rush, no noise. Just a slow, easy movement, like a man stepping out onto his own front porch. Silas Rook was tall and lean, with a face that had too many angles and not enough warmth. His skin was weathered the way old leather gets, pulled tight across sharp cheekbones. His eyes were pale, almost colorless in the bright midday sun, and they did not blink the way normal eyes did. They just settled on Ellie and stayed there. He wore a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His boots were dusty. His hands hung loose at his sides. He did not say anything at first. He just stood there in the middle of the road, about 20 feet ahead of her, and looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they have already decided belongs to them. Ellie stopped breathing for a second. Then she took one small step backward. His eyes moved to the paper bag in her arms. "Now, where you headed in such a hurry, little one?" His voice was low and smooth, not mean-sounding. That was the worst part of it. It was the kind of voice that was trying to sound like something safe, like something familiar. But underneath it, like a bad smell under something sweet, was something else entirely. Ellie did not answer. Her mind was working fast, even though her feet had gone stiff. She thought about turning and running back toward town. But the road behind her was long and open, and she had already come more than halfway. She thought about stepping into the grass on the left side and pushing through it. But the grass was thick and tall, and she did not know what was in it. Silas took one slow step forward. Ellie took one step back. "That's a big bag for a little girl," he said. His eyes did not leave her face. "Somebody send you out here all by yourself?" He said it gentle, like concern, like he was worried about her. But his feet kept moving. One step, then another, slow and even, closing the distance between them like a clock ticking down. Ellie's back foot found the edge of the road. The dry grass brushed against her ankle. She was running out of road. "My mama's waiting on me," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. She pressed her lips together tight and stood up as straight as she could with the heavy bag in her arms. "She knows I'm coming." Something crossed his face then. Not softness. The opposite of softness. A small, quick change behind those pale eyes, like a door closing. "Sure she does," he said. He kept walking toward her. Ellie stepped sideways, trying to put more road between them. But there was not much road left. The grass pressed in close on both sides, and the narrow dirt path felt thinner with every step he took. He moved with her, adjusting his angle without hurrying, cutting off the open space ahead of her, the way you might guide something into a corner without making it look like that was what you were doing. But that was exactly what he was doing. Her heart was hammering now. Her arms were shaking around the bag. She could feel the hard edge of the medicine bottle pressing into her wrist, and she held onto it like it was something solid to anchor her. She was cornered. The grass was at her back. The road had narrowed down to almost nothing. And Silas Rook stood between her and everything else, his pale eyes fixed on her, that terrible, almost smile on his face. He took one more step, and then, from somewhere far down the road behind him, came a sound. Low at first, a deep, steady rumble rolling in through the thick midday air, getting louder with each second that passed. An engine. The rumble grew fast. It was not the soft hum of a passing car or the rattle of a farm truck. This was something bigger, something with weight behind it, the kind of sound that moved through your chest before it ever reached your ears. Silas heard it too. His head turned just slightly, a small, careful movement, like an animal catching a new scent on the wind. His eyes flicked down the road for just a second before coming back to Ellie. That 1 second was enough. Ellie saw the motorcycle first as a dark shape through the shimmer of heat rising off the dirt road. Then it got bigger, fast. A heavy machine, chrome catching the sun in sharp flashes, the engine growling deep and steady like something that had covered a lot of miles and had plenty left in it. The rider sat straight, both hands easy on the handlebars. No helmet. Gray touched the hair at his temples, and a thick leather vest sat across his wide shoulders, worn smooth at the edges from years of use. He was not young. His face had deep lines in it, the kind that come from weather and hard living, not from age alone. But his eyes, even from a distance, were sharp and quick. He saw them. He saw them fast. The motorcycle did not slow gradually the way someone might if they were simply passing through. It slowed with purpose. Deliberate and direct. The way a man slows down when he has already made a decision. The bike came to a stop about 15 feet away. The engine cut off. Silence came back to the road, but it was a different silence than before. This one had weight in it. The man swung off the bike in one smooth movement and stood beside it for just a moment. His boots hit the dirt road with a quiet, solid sound. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. He wore no expression on his face, nothing threatening, nothing inviting either, just a steady, level look that moved from Ellie to Silas, and did not waver. Ellie watched his eyes. He had taken in the whole picture in about 3 seconds. The bag clutched to her chest, the grass pressing at her back, the distance between her and Silas, the angle of Silas's body, and the way he had positioned himself on the road. He understood exactly what he was looking at. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked forward at an even, unhurried pace, boots pressing quiet into the dirt, and placed himself directly between Ellie and Silas Rook. He stood with his back to Ellie, and his eyes on Silas. He said nothing yet. He did not need to. The man was not small, and the space he took up on that narrow road felt larger than just his body. Something about the way he stood, weight balanced, shoulders easy but square, hands loose at his sides, made it clear without a single word that the road had just changed ownership. Silas had gone very still. That almost smile was gone now. In its place was something harder and more careful. His pale eyes moved over the man in front of him, reading him the way a person reads a situation they had not planned for. His jaw shifted once. The two men looked at each other across a short stretch of dusty road. The air between them was tight. Then Silas took one step back. It was small, casual even, like it was his own idea, like he was simply choosing to move and not being pushed. His face stayed flat and unreadable. He let out a slow breath through his nose, looked once past the man at Ellie, and then looked back at the road ahead. He turned and walked away. Not fast, not scared looking, just steady and slow, the way he had arrived. Like none of this had mattered very much to him at all. But he left. And Ellie stood behind the leather-vested stranger, her arms still wrapped tight around her paper bag, watching Silas Rook grow smaller and smaller in the distance, until the road swallowed him whole. The man did not turn around right away. He watched the road for a long moment after Silas disappeared around the bend. His eyes stayed fixed on the spot where the man had gone, like he was making sure the threat was truly gone, before he let himself breathe easy. Only when the road was completely still and empty did he finally turn around. He looked down at Ellie. She had not moved. She still stood with her back near the tall grass, her arms locked around the paper bag, her chin lifted just slightly the way a child does when they are trying very hard not to cry. The man crouched down slowly. He brought himself to her level, one knee nearly touching the dirt, so that his face was close to hers, and his eyes were looking straight into hers. Not above her, not past her, right at her. His voice came out low and even. "You all right?" 2 words, simple and quiet. But there was something in them that made Ellie's tight chest loosen just a little. She nodded, one small nod. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded again, but her bottom lip gave a small tremble that she could not quite stop. He did not make a big deal of it. He did not fuss or panic or make her feel small for being scared. He just let out a slow breath and kept his eyes steady on her face. "That man bother you before today?" he asked. Ellie shook her head. "No, sir. I never talked to him before. But everybody in town says to stay away from him." The man gave a small nod, like that told him something useful. "Everybody's right," he said simply. He looked down at the bag in her arms. "That's a heavy load for someone your size. Where you headed?" "Home," Ellie said. "My mama's sick. I got her bread and soup broth and her medicine." She paused and looked at him more carefully. She noticed the worn leather vest, the faded patches on it, the grease on his knuckles, the gray at his temples. He looked rough in the way that old trees look rough. Solid, weathered, not dangerous. "I'll walk with you a spell," he said. "Make sure you get there fine." He stood back up to his full height and looked toward his motorcycle still sitting on the side of the road. He walked over to it, rolled it forward to the edge of the grass, and set it carefully on its stand. Then he came back and fell into step beside her as she started walking. "My name's Jack," he said. "Ellie Mae Walker," she said. "That's a good name." They walked together in easy quiet for a little while. The dirt road stretched ahead of them, lined on both sides by tall, yellowed grass, and a few leaning fence posts, with old wire strung between them. The sun was high, and the air was warm and dry. "How long has your mama been sick?" Jack asked after a bit. "A while now," Ellie said. "She gets tired real easy, and she coughs a lot at night." She squeezed the bag a little tighter. "I pray for her every single night, but she's not getting better yet." Jack was quiet for a moment. "You keep praying," he said. "That matters. And you keep doing what you're doing, taking care of her like you are. That matters too." Ellie looked up at him. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he said. She nodded and looked back at the road ahead. Jack kept walking beside her, but his eyes moved differently than they had in conversation. They shifted to the sides of the road, to the far tree line, to the bend in the path behind them. He scanned slowly and carefully without making it obvious. And then something stopped him cold inside. He had been turning the image of Silas Rook over in his mind since the moment the man had walked away. The flat, pale eyes, the way he had moved, the calculated stillness of him, the fact that he had been watching a small child alone on a road. Jack had seen it before, not here, not in this town, a different town, years back. A similar road, a similar pattern of a man who kept to the edges of places, who watched the weak and the small and the alone, who never quite did anything you could prove but who left a trail of wrong behind him like a shadow that never fully lifted. Jack's jaw tightened. It was the same man. He was certain of it. The bag slipped. It was not a bad slip, just enough that the bottom corner folded inward and one of the small medicine bottles shifted with a soft, clinking sound. Ellie fumbled to catch it, her small arms squeezing tighter around the paper, her face pinching with worry. "Easy," Jack said. He reached over and steadied the bottom of the bag with one large hand. "Let me fix that for you." Ellie let him take it. He stopped walking for a moment and crouched down, setting the bag carefully on the flat top of an old fence post near the road's edge. He opened the top and checked that nothing had broken. The medicine bottle was fine. The soup broth tin was fine. The bread was a little pressed on one corner, but still good. He began folding the top of the bag down tighter to keep everything snug and secure. He pressed the sides firm. Then he ran his thumb along the bottom seam to make sure the paper was not about to give out under the weight. That was when he felt it. His thumb stopped. He pressed again, slower this time. There was something inside the lining of the bag. Not inside the bag itself. Not with the food. It was tucked between the outer layer of the thick paper and an inner layer that had been folded double at the bottom, the way some market bags were made to hold their shape. Something flat and stiff. Jack did not say anything to Ellie right away. He kept his face calm and easy. He turned the bag slightly and worked his fingers along the bottom edge until he found a small gap in the folded seam. He pressed gently and felt the corner of something slip partway out. Paper. Folded small and tight. He pulled it free. It was a piece of paper that had been folded into a rectangle no bigger than 2 fingers wide. The outside of it was plain. No writing on it. He looked at Ellie. "Did you know there was something tucked in this bag?" he asked. She looked at it with wide eyes and shook her head. "No, sir. I just picked up the bag at the counter when the man handed it to me." Jack unfolded it slowly. It had been folded several times and the paper was thin, almost soft at the creases from being handled before. When he had it fully open, he held it up to the afternoon light coming through the trees. It was a list, names and addresses, written in tight, small handwriting in dark ink. Each entry had a name on the left side and a short note beside it. He scanned down the column slowly. Some of the notes said things like, "2 children, no man in house." Others said, "Woman alone, illness confirmed." One said, "Supply pickup scheduled." Another said, "Watching." His chest went cold. He kept reading. His eyes moved down the list carefully and without rushing, the way a man reads something he wants to understand completely before he reacts to it. Near the bottom of the list, he found it. Walker. The address matched the direction Ellie had been walking. Beside the name was a short note in the same tight handwriting. It said, "Mother bedridden. Child runs errands alone. Tuesdays and Fridays." Jack did not move for a moment. Tuesdays and Fridays. Today was Tuesday. He looked at the very bottom of the page. There was a mark there. Not a signature, not a name, just a small symbol drawn in ink. A rough shape, like a hooked line with a circle pressed against it. It meant nothing to most people, but Jack had seen that mark before. He had seen it scratched into a door frame in another town years ago, in a place where things had gone very wrong for people who could not protect themselves. He had never forgotten it, because of what came after. His hand closed slowly around the note. He folded it back up and put it in the inside pocket of his vest, close to his chest. The farmhouse sat low against the land. It was a small place. The wood on the outside had gone gray from too many summers, and not enough paint. The porch steps bowed slightly in the middle. A window on the left side of the front wall had a crack running through the bottom corner of the glass, sealed over with a thin strip of cloth tape that had started to peel at one edge. But there were small signs of care everywhere, if you knew how to look. A clay pot near the front door held a handful of dried wildflowers, purple and pale yellow. stems tied together with a piece of kitchen string. The porch boards had been swept clean. A folded cloth hung neatly over the porch rail. Someone had tried hard to keep this place standing. That was plain. Ellie pushed open the front door and went in first. "Mama," she called, her voice soft but eager. "Mama, I'm home. I got everything." The front room was dim. A single lamp burned on a small table near the window, its light warm and low. The smell of the room was medicine and wood and something faint, like dried herbs. Eleanor Walker was lying on a narrow cot against the far wall of the kitchen, which opened directly off the front room. She had a thin blanket pulled up to her waist, despite the warmth of the evening. Her face was pale, and her eyes were closed. But when she heard Ellie's voice, her expression changed before she even opened her eyes. Something soft moved across her features, something relieved. She opened her eyes. "There she is," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet and a little rough, like someone who had not spoken much that day. She turned her head slowly and saw Jack standing just inside the doorway. Her eyes studied him for a moment. Not with fear exactly, more with the careful look of a woman who had learned not to trust things quickly. "Mama, this is Jack," Ellie said, setting the bag down on the kitchen table with both hands. "He walked me home. There was a man on the road, and Jack made him go away." Eleanor looked at Jack steadily. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, and she meant every part of them. Jack nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. Your girl did fine. She kept her head." Ellie busied herself at the table, carefully pulling out the bread in the soup tin and setting the medicine bottle near the lamp where her mother could see it. Her movements were practiced and sure, the movements of a child who had done this many times before. She narrated each item as she set it down, making her voice cheerful and light. Jack watched from the doorway. He did not go far inside. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and let his eyes move slowly around the room, the way they always did when he entered an unfamiliar space. It was an old habit, not a suspicious one. Just careful. He noticed the table first. One of the chairs had been moved, not pulled out like someone had sat in it. Moved sideways, about a foot to the right, as if someone had stepped past it in a hurry and nudged it without straightening it afterward. The chair Ellie had just stepped around without thinking, because she was used to stepping around it. He noticed the window latch above the kitchen basin. It was not locked. The latch was twisted at an angle, not fully seated in the catch, the way a latched window should sit. It was loose, open enough that the window could be lifted from the outside with very little effort. He noticed the dried mud on the floor near the back door. 2 small smears of it, dark against the pale wood planks, in a place where no one in the house would have tracked it in naturally. He looked at Eleanor Walker, resting on her cot, and at Ellie carefully measuring medicine the way her mother had likely taught her. He looked back at the mud. He was not leaving tonight. The morning came in gray and slow. Jack was up before the light changed. He had slept in the front room on the floor with his back against the wall and his boots still on, the way he always slept in a place he did not yet trust. He had not slept deeply. He rarely did anymore. He checked the window latch before he left. He pressed it firmly into the catch and tested it twice. Then he stepped off the porch quietly, pulling the door shut behind him without a sound. Ellie was still sleeping. Eleanor had made it through the night without the fever climbing. That was enough for now. Jack walked his bike a good distance down the road before he started the engine. He did not want to wake them. The town of Harlan Crossing sat about 2 miles back the way he had come. It was the kind of town that looked like it had been placed there a long time ago, and then mostly forgotten. One main road ran through the middle of it. There was a hardware store, a small post office, a diner with hand-painted letters on the window, and the market where Ellie had bought her bread and soup and medicine. Jack rode in slow. People noticed him right away. That was nothing new. A Hell's Angel rolling into a small town on a Tuesday morning tended to pull eyes. He did not react to the looks. He parked in front of the diner, swung off the bike, and walked inside like he had been coming here for years. He ordered coffee, black. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a dish towel over one shoulder. She set the coffee down without a word, but did not move away right away. She stood there for a moment, wiping down the counter in slow circles. "You the one who walked the Walker girl home yesterday," she said. It was not quite a question. "I was in the area," Jack said. She nodded slowly. "That child shouldn't be walking that road alone." "No," Jack agreed. "She shouldn't." The woman looked at him a moment longer, then moved down the counter to refill another cup. Jack drank his coffee and listened. A diner in a small town in the morning is one of the best places in the world to learn what is happening. People talk. They do not always realize how much. Jack had learned a long time ago to just sit still and let the words find him. He heard the name Rook once, spoken low between two older men in the corner booth. One of them shook his head, and the other one looked at the table. That was enough. The medical clinic was on the far end of the main road. It was a plain building, white with a green door. A small sign beside the entrance read, "Harlan Crossing Community Health. Walk-ins, welcome." Jack pushed the door open. The front room had 4 chairs lined against one wall, and a desk near the back where a woman in blue scrubs was sorting through a stack of paper files. She was maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and careful eyes that moved to him the second he stepped inside. Her name tag said, Ruth. She did not look frightened, but she did not look relaxed either. "Help you?" she said. "Maybe," Jack said. He stopped a few feet from the desk. He kept his hands visible, easy. "I'm trying to understand something about what's been happening in this town. To sick households, supplies going missing." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was set. "You a reporter?" she asked. "No." "Law enforcement?" "No." She studied his jacket, the patch, the worn leather. She looked back at his face. "You're the one who helped Ellie Walker," she said quietly. "Yes," Jack said. Something shifted in her expression, not all the way open, but the door had moved a little. "Sit down," Ruth said. Ruth pulled a chair around from behind her desk and sat across from Jack rather than behind it. That small move told him something. She was not hiding. She was choosing to be straight with him. She folded her hands in her lap. "It started about 4 months ago," she said. "Maybe a little longer. I noticed it first with old Mr. Garner. He lives on the east side of the Creek Road. His daughter had dropped off 2 weeks' worth of canned goods and his heart medication. By the end of the first week, half of it was gone. He thought he had miscounted. He is 81 years old. He figured his memory was going." Jack listened without interrupting. Then the Pettis family. Mother with a bad lung condition. Her son drove 2 hours to bring her an inhaler and a box of supplements the doctor recommended, gone inside of 5 days. The son called me because his mother told him she must have lost them. Ruth shook her head slowly. She had not lost them. Jack wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He had carried it in from the diner without thinking. The warmth against his palms helped him focus. "How many households?" he asked. Ruth stood and walked to the filing cabinet along the wall. She pulled open the second drawer and took out a folder. She did not hand it to him right away. She opened it herself and looked at the top page, like she was making one final decision. Then she set it on the desk in front of him. 7 that I know of," she said. "All of them sick. All of them living alone or close to it. All of them receiving outside help from family or community aid." Jack looked at the page. It was a handwritten list. Names, addresses, notes about conditions. Diabetes, a recovering stroke, 2 cases of severe flu that had not cleared right. Eleanor Walker's name was near the bottom, with a small note beside it that said, 2 children, Mother bedridden. No regular visitors. His jaw tightened. "You wrote this?" he asked. "I did. About 3 weeks ago, after the 4th case. I wanted to track it." She paused. "I didn't know what I was tracking yet. I thought maybe it was someone desperate, someone hungry and stealing out of need." "But you stopped thinking that," Jack said. Ruth looked at him steadily. "The people being targeted are not random. They are all on some kind of community aid list, a church donation record, a clinic assistance form, a food bank intake sheet. Someone has been reading those lists." Jack set the folder down carefully. He thought about the torn note he had found folded inside Ellie's food bag the afternoon before, the one with names and addresses, the one with the mark at the bottom, the mark he had seen before. He had not told Ruth about the note yet. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket now and pulled it out. He unfolded it slowly and placed it on the desk beside her folder. Ruth leaned in. Her face went still. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "In the lining of the bag Ellie was carrying home from the market," Jack said. "Someone had tucked it in there. Could have been placed while the bag was being packed. Could have been slipped in while she was walking." Ruth touched the edge of the note, but did not pick it up. Her finger moved along the list of names. Every single name on the torn note was also in her folder. Every one. The room was quiet. Outside, a truck rolled past on the main road. Somewhere down the street, a screen door banged shut in the wind. Jack looked at the two lists side by side. Ruth's careful handwriting, the torn note with its cramped, deliberate letters, and that small mark pressed into the corner. This was not desperation. This was not random hunger or careless crime. This was a system, built carefully, run quietly, targeting the weakest people in the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Silas Rook was hunting by design. The sun was pulling low behind the tree line when Jack turned his motorcycle onto the dirt path that led to the Walker property. Ellie walked beside him, her small hand resting on the handlebar, as if steering something much larger than herself. The farmhouse came into view through a break in the tall grass. It was small and tired-looking. The front porch sagged on one side. The window screens were patched with strips of tape that had started peeling at the corners. A clay pot by the door held a dead plant that someone had forgotten to water or had simply stopped having the energy to tend. Jack took all of it in without a word. He leaned his bike against the fence post and followed Ellie up the porch steps. She pushed the door open and called out softly, "Mama, I'm home. I got everything." Eleanor Walker was lying on the cot near the kitchen window. She turned her head slowly. Her face was pale and thin, but her eyes were warm. They moved from Ellie to Jack and held there for a moment. "Ellie told me about you," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "She said you walked her safe." Jack held his riding gloves in one hand. He stood near the doorway, not wanting to crowd the space. "Yes, ma'am. Just wanted to make sure she got here all right." Eleanor studied him the way tired people do. Not with suspicion exactly, just with the careful look of someone who has learned that kindness sometimes comes with cost. "Well," she said quietly, "thank you." Jack noticed the empty water pitcher on the counter. He noticed the firewood bin beside the stove was almost bare. The small medicine bottle on the table was nearly finished. He set his gloves down on the bench by the door. "You mind if I fill that pitcher?" he asked. Eleanor blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Jack said simply. He filled the pitcher from the hand pump at the sink, brought it to the table, and poured Eleanor a glass without being asked. Then he went outside without explaining himself, and came back 10 minutes later with enough split wood to last through the night, stacked neatly beside the stove. Ellie watched him with wide, quiet eyes, like she was trying to memorize what it looked like when someone just helped without making it into something big. Jack checked the door latch before he left. It was loose. One of the screws had stripped its thread. He tightened it with the small tool set he kept clipped inside his jacket. He did not stay long. He told Ellie he would check on them in the morning, and he told Eleanor to keep the door latched. He said it gently, but Eleanor heard the weight behind it. She nodded without asking why. By the time Jack rode back through the village, the evening light had gone orange and low. A few people were still out. A man watering his garden paused and watched as the motorcycle rolled past. Two women talking outside the general store stopped mid-sentence. Jack kept his speed steady. He did not look away from the road. He pulled up outside the only motel the village had, a low flat building with a hand-painted sign and a flickering light above the office door. He paid for a room in cash and parked his bike where he could see it from the window. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the worn carpet beneath his boots. He could already feel the town shifting around him. The stairs, the quiet that fell when he passed. He had lived inside that kind of silence most of his adult life. It followed the patch on his back everywhere he went. It did not surprise him. But tonight, for reasons he did not fully examine, it sat heavier than usual. Across the village, lights were going on inside houses one by one. And in those warm, worried rooms, people were talking. About the stranger, about the motorcycle, about the big man with the biker jacket who had shown up on the road and followed a little girl home. Morning came in quiet and gray. A thin mist sat low over the fields on the edge of town, and the dirt roads were damp from overnight dew. Jack was up before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. He had slept lightly, the way he always did in unfamiliar places. One ear on the room, one ear on whatever was outside it. Old habit. But he had slept, and that was enough. He pulled on his jacket and walked to the diner 2 blocks from the motel. It was a narrow place with 6 tables and a counter with 4 stools. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hit him at the door. He took the stool at the far end of the counter, where his back was to the wall, and his eyes were to the room. A few locals glanced at him when he walked in. Most looked away quickly. One older man at a corner table held his gaze a moment longer than the others, then went back to his eggs. Jack ordered black coffee and said nothing more. He was on his second cup when the door opened and a woman in scrubs walked in. She was maybe 50, with short silver hair and quick eyes. She looked around the room, spotted Jack, and walked straight to the counter without hesitation. "You're the one who walked the Walker girl home," she said. It was not a question. "I am," Jack said. She sat down on the stool beside him. "I'm Ruth. I'm the nurse at the county health post." She folded her hands on the counter. "I've been watching what's been happening in this town for a while now. Supplies going missing. People getting sicker when they should be getting better. I didn't know who to tell." Jack wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Tell me what you've seen." Ruth talked quietly and steadily for a long time. She told him about medicine orders that came in short, about household aid packages that arrived half empty, about the names on the distribution list that seemed to get worse faster than they should, names of people living alone, people without family nearby, people who were already too tired to ask questions. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled the folded note from inside his jacket pocket, the one he had found in Ellie's food bag the evening before. He smoothed it open on the counter and slid it toward her. Ruth looked at it for a long moment. Her jaw tightened. "That's the aid roster. I filed that report 3 weeks ago." She looked up at him. "That should never have left the health post office." Jack folded it back up carefully. "But it did." Ruth nodded slowly. She looked like someone who had just found the answer to a question that had been keeping her awake at night. They left the diner together and walked to the health post, where Ruth pulled her own records. Side by side, they went through 2 weeks of delivery logs. Jack wrote nothing down. He just looked and remembered. He was good at that. Numbers, names, patterns. They lined up in his mind the way distances lined up on a long road. There were gaps, consistent ones, the same household names, the same delivery windows. Someone had been skimming from the most vulnerable people in that village, and they had been doing it carefully enough that each missing item looked like a clerical error on its own. But together, the gaps told a different story. By mid-afternoon, Jack had quietly crossed the village twice on his bike, stopping once at the general store where a young clerk named Danny confirmed he had seen a truck parked near the aid drop point, twice in the past month, when it had no business being there. That evening, Jack rode out to the Walker farmhouse. Ellie opened the door before he knocked. "Mama ate soup," she said. Her voice was different from the day before, lighter. A whole bowl. Jack looked past her into the dim kitchen. Eleanor was sitting up on her cot, not lying flat. Her color was still pale, but her eyes were open and clear. She raised one hand slowly when she saw him. The morning came, in slow and warm. Jack sat on the front steps of the Walker farmhouse with a tin cup of coffee Ruth had brought over earlier. The fields around the property were quiet. Birds moved through the tall grass at the fence line. The sky was pale blue and wide. Inside, Eleanor was awake. Ellie was helping her mother comb her hair, something she did every morning with great care and seriousness. Jack could hear them talking softly through the screen door. Ellie's voice was small but steady. Eleanor's voice was thin but present. That alone felt like something worth protecting. Ruth arrived just after 8. She came in her small white car, parking it at the edge of the dirt drive. She carried a brown folder thick with papers and had a look on her face that meant she had not slept much. "I talked to May Grover last night," she said, sitting down on the steps beside Jack. She set the folder on her knees. "You know who she is?" Jack shook his head. "Retired sheriff's wife. Her husband passed 4 years ago. She still knows everybody, and everybody still respects her." Ruth tapped the folder. "I showed her what we found. The delivery gaps. The roster that ended up in Ellie's food bag. She sat with it for a long time." Ruth paused. Then she said we needed to call a town meeting. Jack looked out across the field. "People here are scared of him." "They are," Ruth said. "But May thinks fear loses its grip when people stop standing alone in it." She opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten page. "She's already drafted a notice. We want to hold it at the community hall this afternoon, 2:00. Jack was quiet for a moment. A crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard, looked around and flew off again. "He'll hear about it," Jack said. "Yes," Ruth said. "He probably will." "That's all right," Jack said. "Sometimes you want the snake to know the grass is getting shorter." Ruth almost smiled at that. They spent the morning preparing. Ruth drove back into town to meet with May Grover, and Jack followed on his bike, parking outside the community hall while the two women went inside to arrange the space. May Grover was a small woman, with white hair cut close, and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She shook Jack's hand with a firm grip, and looked at him the way a person looks at someone they are still deciding about. "I've heard things about you," she said plainly. "Most people have," Jack said. "Some of those things were not kind." "No," he said. "They usually aren't." May studied him for another moment. Then she nodded once and turned back to her work. That was enough for her, apparently. And it was enough for him. By mid-morning, Danny from the general store had arrived with 2 boxes of his own records, purchase logs, inventory discrepancies. He spread them out on the long table in the hall and went through them with Ruth, cross-referencing dates against the aid delivery gaps she had already documented. Jack walked slowly along the table, looking at the pages without touching them. He pointed twice, once to a cluster of dates in the second week of the previous month, once to a name that appeared in 3 separate records with no clear reason. Danny looked up at him. "You see something?" "Same window every time," Jack said. 3 days before each aid drop. Like someone was checking what was coming before it arrived. Danny leaned in closer to his own records. His face changed. "That's the order confirmation window," he said quietly. "Someone would have needed access to the advance orders to know that." Ruth looked at May. May looked at Jack. The hall was very quiet for a moment. Outside, the village was starting to fill with the ordinary sounds of an afternoon. Doors opening, people moving. Word had gotten around about the meeting. People were coming. slowly at first. But they were coming. The afternoon meeting had gone better than Jack expected. Not perfectly. Nothing like this ever went perfectly. But people had shown up. More than Ruth had hoped for. More than May had predicted. Farmers and shop owners and quiet women who had been carrying worry alone for too long. They sat in folding chairs and listened. Some crossed their arms. Some leaned forward. A few wept softly when the full picture came into focus. The evidence was not complete, but it was enough to plant a seed of belief where fear had lived for too long. May had spoken first. Then Ruth. Danny had laid out his records with steady hands and a clear voice. Jack had stood near the back of the room and said almost nothing. That was by design. This was their town, their trust to rebuild. His job today was to hold the door open, not walk through it first. By the time it was over, 3 more residents had come forward with their own missing supply stories. A retired farmer named Gerald had offered his truck to move medicine safely between households until things were resolved. A woman named Carol had volunteered her spare room to store aid packages away from the usual routes. Small steps, but real ones. Jack had shaken hands, nodded, and slipped out before the last chair was folded. The evening air was cooler than it had been all week. Jack walked the main road back toward the edge of town, where he had parked his bike near a small motor lodge. The lodge was nothing special. 6 rooms and a vending machine that only half worked. He had paid 2 nights in advance in cash, the way he always did. He could hear crickets starting up in the tall weeds along the roadside. Somewhere behind a fence, a dog barked twice and went quiet. He needed to wash his face, check his phone, think through the next steps without 5 sets of eyes watching him do it. The motor lodge office light was on. The parking lot was empty except for his bike. He stood beside it for a moment, just breathing. He rested one hand on the handlebars. The chrome was warm from the earlier sun, but cooling fast now. He had ridden this bike across more broken places than he could count. It had never let him down. He went inside his room and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at the notes he had written out in his small notepad. Names, dates, patterns. He studied them the way a man studies a map when he knows a storm is coming and needs to find high ground. His phone buzzed. A message from Ruth. May says we should file a formal complaint with the county office tomorrow morning. She knows the right person to call. Are you in? He typed back. Yes. I'll be ready at 8. He set the phone down and rubbed the back of his neck. It was just past 9 when he heard the cars. 2 of them, moving fast up the gravel lot. Their headlights swept across the curtain of his window. He stood up before the engines even cut off. Boots on gravel, then a sharp knock. Not a polite knock. The kind that meant they already had their hands on the doorframe. Jack opened it. 2 county deputies stood outside. One was young with a tight jaw. The other was older with heavy eyes that had seen too many long nights. Behind them, the motor lodge manager stood with his arms crossed, and a look that was part sorry and part relieved. It wasn't his problem. The older deputy held up a clear plastic bag. Inside was a bottle of prescription medicine. The label was from the county aid supply, the kind that had been going missing from sick households all over town. Found these in the exterior storage box on your motorcycle, the deputy said. His voice was flat and practiced. We're going to need you to come with us, Mr. Morrison. Jack looked at the bag, then at the deputy, then back at the bag. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He put his hands forward. The morning came in gray and slow. Ellie sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. There was no tea left. There had not been any for 3 days. But the warmth felt good against her palms, and she liked having something to hold. Her mother was awake. That was a good thing. She had slept through most of the day before, which always made Ellie's chest feel tight and strange. But this morning, Mama had asked for water, then asked what time it was, then asked if Ellie had eaten. Those were good signs. Ruth had told her that. Good signs meant Mama was fighting. Ellie had nodded and said yes to all 3 questions even though she had not eaten yet. She was going to. She just was not hungry. Ruth arrived before 9. She knocked twice in her usual way, quick and light, and pushed the door open with her shoulder the way people do when their hands are full. She was carrying a cloth bag with bread, and 2 apples, and a small jar of broth. She set it all on the counter without saying much. Then she turned around, and her face was different. Ellie noticed right away. Ruth's face was the kind that showed everything even when she did not mean it to. Right now, it showed something careful. The kind of careful that meant bad news was sitting behind her teeth, and she was deciding how to let it out gently. "What happened?" Ellie asked. Ruth pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Jack was taken in last night," she said, "by the deputies." The warm cup in Ellie's hands suddenly felt very cold. "Taken in?" Ellie said. "Like arrested?" "They're asking him questions," Ruth said. "It's not settled yet. May and I are working on it." Ellie set the cup down. She stared at the table. There was an old scratch in the wood that she had traced with her finger 100 times. She traced it now without thinking. "They think he stole something," she said. It was not a question. Ruth was quiet for 1 second too long. "They found medicine on his bike. But Ellie, that doesn't mean he did it. You and I both know that." Ellie knew. She knew it the way she knew the difference between a real smile and a polite one. Jack was not someone who stole medicine from sick people. That was not who he was. She had known it from the moment he knelt down on that dusty road and looked at her like she mattered. But knowing something in your heart and being able to prove it were 2 very different things. She had learned that early. She spent the rest of the morning close to her mother's side. She refilled the water cup. She opened the window just enough to let in some air. She sat on the floor beside the cot and listened to her mother breathe. In the afternoon, she went outside and sat on the porch step. The sky had cleared up and gone pale blue, with thin clouds moving slow across it. The dirt yard was quiet. The old fence post near the garden had leaned a little more since the last rain. She thought about Silas. She thought about his voice, the way it had sounded on the road that day. Smooth and low, like something practiced. Like he had said those kinds of things before. Like he already knew what was going to happen before she did. She thought about his eyes. The way they had moved, not just looking at her, but looking past her, like he was counting something. By evening, Ellie had made a quiet decision. She could not do much. She was 6 years old and small for her age, and her mother was sick, and the man who had helped them was sitting somewhere being asked questions he should not have to answer. But she had been there, on that road, and she had been watching too. She began going back through everything she remembered. May Granger's house smelled like coffee and old wood. It always had, even back when her husband Earl had been sheriff, and half the town found reasons to stop by on a Tuesday afternoon. The smell had stayed long after Earl passed. It lived in the curtains and the floorboards and the little braided rug by the front door. Ruth sat at May's kitchen table with both hands flat on the surface. Her nurse's bag was on the floor beside her chair. She had not taken off her coat yet, even though she had been inside for 10 minutes. May set 2 mugs of coffee down and pulled out the chair across from her. She was a small woman with white hair, cut close to her head, and sharp brown eyes that missed very little. She had spent 30 years beside a lawman. She had learned to see things the way he did. "Start from the beginning," May said. Ruth picked up her mug and held it. They found 2 bottles of Mrs. Hartley's heart medicine in the side compartment of Jack's bike. Mrs. Hartley reported them missing 4 days ago. 4 days ago, May repeated. She said it slowly, the way you repeat something when the numbers do not add up. "Jack arrived in this village 5 days ago," Ruth said. May looked at her over the rim of her mug. "So, they're saying he took Mrs. Hartley's medicine the day after he got here." "That's what they're saying." May set her mug down and was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the night had gone still. A single bulb over her back porch threw a thin yellow light into the yard. Moths circled it slowly. The day after he arrived, May said again, more to herself than to Ruth, when nobody knew his face yet, when he had no reason to be anywhere near the Hartley property. He was with Ellie, Ruth said, that whole day. I talked to Ellie. She said he walked her home, stayed at the farmhouse that evening, slept near the road that night. He was not moving around town, May. He was planted in one spot. May stood up. May. She went to the kitchen drawer nearest the stove and pulled out a yellow notepad and a pen. She sat back down and started writing. "What else?" she said. Ruth leaned forward. "The bottles." The medicine was sealed. Earl always said that when someone takes medicine to sell it or use it, the seal goes first. These were still sealed. Meaning whoever put them there didn't want the medicine, May said. They just wanted something to find. Yes. May wrote that down. She tapped the pen against the notepad. Silas was in town the same afternoon the deputies searched Jack's things. I saw his truck parked outside the feed store, 2 hours before the search. Ruth stared at her. "You saw him." "I did." May's voice was steady, but something behind her eyes had gone sharp and hard. "I didn't think much of it then, but now." "Now it matters," Ruth said. "Everything matters now." Ruth opened her nurse's bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it flat on the table between them. It was a list she had put together over the past 2 days. Names of households where medicine had gone missing. Dates. Amounts. May studied it. She ran her finger down the column of names slowly. 7 households, she said. 7 in the last 6 weeks alone, Ruth said, and every single one of them is either elderly, sick, or living alone. No one who could put up much of a fight. No one who would be believed too quickly. May set the paper down and looked at Ruth straight across the table. "This is not a biker stealing medicine," she said. "This is something organized." "I know." "And they've arrested the wrong man." "I know that too." May closed the notepad. She folded her hands on top of it. The kitchen was very quiet. The moths outside kept circling the porch light. "Then we are not going to sit here and let this stand," May said. The morning air was cool and flat. Jack stood outside the small county substation with his jacket over one arm and his boots still dusty from 2 days ago. The deputy behind the front desk had not looked at him when he handed back his things. Just slid the small plastic bag across the counter and turned away. That was fine. Jack was used to that. He stood on the gravel outside and put his jacket on slow. The sun was low, but already warm on his face. Down the road, a rooster was carrying on, like it had something important to say. Somewhere behind the tree line, a truck engine turned over and coughed and died. A regular morning, like nothing had happened at all, except it had. He rolled his shoulders and felt the stiffness in his back from 2 nights on a bench that was too short for him. He thought about Ellie. He thought about her mother. He thought about Silas Rook, parked outside a feed store 2 hours before they searched his bike. May Granger had laid it out for the deputy on duty the evening before. She had been calm and direct, and had used words like inconsistency and timeline and chain of custody in a way that made it clear she had listened to her husband talk shop for a very long time. Ruth had backed her up with dates and records. They had not dropped everything against Jack, but they had loosened their grip. Enough to let him walk out this morning under what the deputy called temporary release, pending further review. That was enough. He pulled on his gloves and walked to where his bike sat beside a rusted chain-link fence. He checked it over the way he always did before riding. Force of habit, mirror, tires, throttle, everything in order. He swung his leg over and sat for a moment without starting the engine. He thought about Silas, about that flat calm the man carried around like a coat. About the way Silas had looked at Ellie on that dusty road, without an ounce of hurry in him. Patient. Like he had all the time in the world and was certain of how things would go. That kind of patience was not random. It was practiced. It belonged to someone who had done this before and walked away clean every time. Not this time. Jack started the engine and pulled out onto the road. He found Ellie sitting on the front porch steps of the farmhouse, with her knees pulled up to her chest and her eyes fixed on the road, like she had been watching for him, like she had been watching for a while. When she saw him turn up the lane, she stood up fast. She did not run down the steps. She waited, but her hands gripped the porch post, and her whole face changed. Jack pulled up and cut the engine and climbed off. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would." She looked at him for a second longer, like she was making sure he was real. Then she nodded once and sat back down on the step. He sat beside her. The wood was warm from the morning sun. Through the front window, he could see the shape of Mrs. Walker resting on the cot. Still there, still breathing. That was what mattered right now. "Is your mama okay?" he asked. "Ruth came by this morning," Ellie said. "She brought more medicine. The real kind. Mama's sleeping now." She picked at a splinter on the porch step. "I heard what happened, about them thinking you took stuff. It's getting sorted out." Ellie looked up at him. Her eyes were steady and very serious. It was him, wasn't it? Silas. Jack looked out at the lane where the dust had settled from his tires. The tree line sat quiet at the far edge of the property. He studied it the way he always studied any stretch of ground he could not see through. "Yeah," he said. It was him. Ellie nodded, like she already knew that. Then she said, "So what do we do now?" Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note, the one he had found in her food bag. He had kept it close the whole time. "Now," he said, "we figure out where he's going next." The afternoon light had gone soft and golden by the time Ruth arrived at the farmhouse with a covered plate of food and a worn leather satchel over one shoulder. She set the plate on the kitchen table without being asked and checked on Mrs. Walker before she said a word to anyone else. That was just how Ruth was. She tended to what needed tending first. Jack stood near the window and waited. Ellie sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water she had not touched. She had been quiet since Jack had shown her the note again. Not frightened quiet. Thinking quiet. There was a difference, and Jack had learned to tell the two apart when it came to this girl. Ruth came back into the kitchen and looked at Jack. "She's still stable. Sleeping deep now. That's good." "Good," Jack said. Ruth pulled out a chair and sat across from Ellie. She folded her hands on the table and spoke gently. "Ellie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think real hard before you answer. Okay?" Ellie looked up. "Okay. The night your mama disappeared, can you walk me through what you heard? Not what you saw. What you heard." Ellie was quiet for a moment. She pressed her lips together and stared at the water glass, like the answer might be sitting at the bottom of it. Then she said, "I woke up because of the door." "Which door?" Ruth asked. "The back one. The one that sticks." Ellie's voice was flat and careful. "It makes a sound when it opens, like a bark almost. A short one." Jack turned slightly from the window. "I heard that," Ellie continued, "and then I heard Mama's voice. Just a little bit of it. She said something, but I couldn't make out the words. And then it was quiet for a long stretch." She paused. "And then I heard the truck." "Tell me about the truck," Jack said quietly. Ellie looked at him. It was old. Not like a brand new truck engine. It kind of rattled when it idled, like something was loose underneath. She thought for a second. It sat there for a bit, running, and then it pulled away. Which direction? Ellie didn't hesitate. Away from town. The sound went the other way. past the old Greer property line. She pointed toward the back of the house, slightly west. That way. Jack looked at Ruth. Ruth's face had gone very still. What? Jack asked. Ruth stood up slowly and moved to the kitchen window. She looked out toward the tree line at the back of the property. The sun was sitting low now, painting everything in long orange shadows. There's an old farm out past the Greer land, she said. Nobody's been on it in years. Old Delbert Crane owned it before he passed. His children never came back for it. She paused. County stopped checking on it after the road out there washed out 3 winters ago. They regraded part of it last spring, but nobody drives out that way. Not regular folks anyway. But the road is passable now, Jack asked. If you knew it was there, and you had a truck with some clearance. Ruth turned from the window. You'd have to know the area. You wouldn't just stumble on it. Jack thought about that. About the kind of man who found places like that on purpose. Who drove quiet roads at odd hours and noted which farmhouses had lights that stayed on too late because someone inside was sick. Who put names on a list and kept it folded in a paper bag where nobody would think to look. Does anyone live near that property? Jack asked. Not for about 2 miles in any direction, Ruth said. The kitchen was very still. Ellie looked between them with her hands flat on the table. Then she said quietly, That's where she is, isn't it? Jack looked at her. He did not look away. We're going to find out, he said. The sun was sliding down behind the tree line when Jack stepped outside. The air had cooled. The kind of cool that settles in fast when the light starts to go. It smelled like dry grass and distant rain. Jack stood on the porch for a moment and listened to the quiet around the farmhouse before he moved. Ruth came out behind him. She had her satchel over her shoulder again and her keys in her hand. Danny confirmed it, she said, keeping her voice low. He remembered seeing Silas buy fuel cans at the hardware store twice in the last month. Cash both times. No conversation. Just in and out. Danny was the store clerk. Young kid, maybe 22, with a nervous habit of pulling at his collar when he was uncomfortable. But he had a good memory. Jack had learned that early on. The boy noticed things, even when he didn't know he was noticing them. Did Danny talk to anyone else? Jack asked. Only to us, Ruth said. I told him to keep quiet until we said otherwise. Jack nodded. Good. He stepped off the porch and walked to where his bike sat under the old oak at the side of the property. He did not start it. He just rested one hand on the handlebar and thought. Ruth followed and stood a few feet back, giving him room to think without crowding him. You said there was a sheriff's deputy, Jack said. Not the one who arrested me. A different one. Walt Briggs, Ruth said. He worked under my husband for 11 years. He's straight. He's been bothered by this whole thing since the night they brought you in. He told me privately the evidence felt wrong. Too clean. Too placed. He willing to move on this? Ruth crossed her arms. He's willing to listen tonight. I told him to meet us at the old Greer fence post at 9. Off the record for now. Just listening. Off the record isn't enough, Jack said. It's enough to get him there, Ruth said. Once he hears what Ellie told us about the truck and the direction, and once I show him the note, he'll move official. Walt's not a man who can sit still when a sick woman is being held somewhere against her will. She paused. He has a daughter of his own, about Ellie's age. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, All right. He looked back at the farmhouse. The kitchen window glowed soft and yellow. Through it, he could see Ellie at the table, her chin resting in her hand, staring at nothing in particular. She was doing that thing again, that thinking quiet. She can't come with us, Jack said. No, Ruth agreed. Absolutely not. She's going to want to. Ruth almost smiled. I know. That child would walk through fire for her mama and not even blink. She looked at the window, too. But I'll stay with her until you and Walt go. I'll keep her settled." Jack moved back toward the porch. "Get her inside and keep the lights low. Don't tell her what time we're leaving. Just tell her we have a plan and her mama is going to be okay." "Can I promise her that?" Ruth asked. Jack stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked back at Ruth over his shoulder. "Promise her we're not going to stop until she is," he said. Ruth gave a slow nod. That was good enough. Inside, Jack sat with Ellie for a while. He did not talk much. He let her talk. She told him about how her mother used to sing in the mornings while she made biscuits, how she had a laugh that started quiet and then kind of took over the whole room, how she always smelled like lavender soap, even when things were hard. Jack listened to every word. When Ellie finally went quiet and her eyes started to get heavy, Jack tucked the old wool blanket up around her on the cot and sat back in the wooden chair beside her until her breathing went slow and even. Then he got up carefully and went to the door. Ruth was waiting. She had the note in her hand and a flashlight in the other. "Walt just sent word," she said quietly. "He'll be at the fence post at 9. He's bringing the note to a judge he trusts tonight if what we show him holds up." Jack checked the small clock on the kitchen shelf. It was 8:10. "Then we move in 50 minutes, he said. The abandoned farmhouse sat at the end of a dirt lane, so narrow that the tall weeds on either side brushed against Jack's arms as he moved through them. The building was dark, not just unlit, dark in the way old places get when nobody has cared for them in a long time. The wood had gone gray. The porch roof on the left side had caved inward. One window near the front door was covered from the inside with a piece of burlap sacking. Jack stopped at the tree line and studied it. No light came from the windows. No sound came from inside. But there was a truck parked around the far side of the structure, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of old fence. Jack could just make out the shape of it in the thin moonlight. The hood was angled toward him. The engine would still be warm. Someone was here. He moved low and quiet, keeping to the edge of the tree line until he reached the near corner of the building. He pressed his back against the wall and listened. The wood was rough against his jacket. Old nails had worked their way loose from the siding and stuck out at odd angles. He felt one catch against his sleeve and eased away from it carefully. He waited. A cicada started up somewhere in the dark behind him and then went quiet again. Jack moved along the wall toward the back of the building. There was a door there. He had spotted it from the lane when they first approached. A plain door with no screen, hanging slightly crooked in its frame. A pale strip of light showed at the bottom edge. Someone was inside with a light source. Something small. A lantern, maybe. He reached the door and put his hand flat against it. He felt no vibration, no movement from the other side, just the faint trace of warmth coming through the old wood. He pressed the latch down slowly. The door swung inward with a low groan that Jack could not fully stop. He moved through fast and stepped to the right, putting his back against the interior wall and letting his eyes adjust. The room was large and nearly empty. Bare floors thick with grit and dust. An old iron stove against the far wall, rusted and useless. A broken chair. A pile of burlap sacks in the corner. The ceiling was low, and some of the boards overhead had warped and bowed downward with age. A battery lantern sat on the floor near the center of the room, casting a pale, yellow circle of light. And there, just inside the edge of that circle, was a cot. Jack crossed to it in 4 long strides. Mrs. Walker lay on her back with her eyes half open, a thin blanket pulled to her chin. Her face was pale and damp. Her breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls. Her lips were cracked and dry. She had clearly not had enough water. Her hands were folded over the blanket, and they trembled slightly with every breath. Jack crouched beside her and put 2 fingers gently to her wrist. Her pulse was there, weak but steady. He leaned close. "Mrs. Walker," he said in a low voice. "It's Jack, Ellie's friend. You're going to be all right." Her eyes moved toward the sound of his voice. Recognition came slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. "Ellie," she whispered. The word was barely sound at all, just breath shaped into her daughter's name. "She's safe," Jack said. "She's with Ruth. She's okay." Mrs. Walker's eyes filled, but she didn't have the strength for more than that. Jack stood and looked around the room. He checked the door he had come through, then turned toward the only other door in the space. It was set into the far wall and was pulled mostly shut. A shadow moved underneath it, slow, deliberate, not the random shifting of light. Something living, something that had been standing on the other side of that door for longer than a few seconds. Silas was still here. Jack did not move toward the door right away. He stood still and kept his breathing slow and even. His eyes stayed fixed on that thin strip of shadow moving beneath the far door. He had learned a long time ago that the worst thing a man could do in a moment like this was act before he had thought it through. Rushing in got people hurt. It got the wrong people hurt. He looked back at Mrs. Walker. She was watching him with wide, tired eyes. "Don't move," he said quietly. "Stay right where you are." She gave the smallest nod. Jack crossed the room slowly, keeping his footsteps light on the gritty floor. He stopped 2 feet from the door and waited. The shadow beneath it had gone still. Whoever was on the other side had stopped moving. They were listening too. Jack put his hand flat on the door and pushed it open in one smooth motion. He stepped through and to the right immediately, putting the wall at his back. Silas Rook stood in the center of a narrow back room. It had once been a pantry of some kind. Shelves lined both walls, and on those shelves sat rows of supplies. Canned food, medicine bottles, bandages still in their paper packaging, bags of dried goods, all of it taken from people who had needed it. Silas did not run. He did not reach for anything. He simply turned his head and looked at Jack, the way a man looks at something he has already thought about and accounted for. His face was calm, almost bored. "Morrison," he said. The name came out flat and unhurried, like he was reading it off a list. "Step away from the shelves," Jack said. Silas tilted his head slightly. "You're supposed to be locked up." "Step away from the shelves," Jack said again. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Something shifted in Silas's eyes. Not fear exactly, more like a man recalculating. He took one slow step to the left, away from the nearest shelf, and stopped there with his arms loose at his sides. Jack kept his position near the doorway. He did not advance. He did not need to close the distance to make his presence felt. He had learned that too. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a man could do was simply not move, not flinch, not give an inch. "You've been at this a long time," Jack said. His voice was steady and low. "Town after town, always the same kind of people, sick folks, families stretched thin, people who can't fight back." Silas said nothing. "You picked the wrong little girl to put on that list," Jack said. A faint sound came from outside the building. Then another, the crunch of tires on dry ground. Headlights swept briefly across the burlap-covered window in the main room behind Jack, throwing pale light through the open doorway. Silas heard it too. His eyes moved toward the window, then back to Jack. The calculation was working again behind his face. "Don't," Jack said simply. Silas went still. Boots hit the ground outside. 2 sets, then more. Voices came low and quick through the walls of the old building. A firm knock landed against the front door, and then it opened without waiting for an answer. A flashlight beam cut across the main room. "In here!" Jack called out. He kept his eyes on Silas the entire time. 2 officers came through the doorway with their flashlights raised. They pulled up short when they saw the shelves. One of them let out a slow breath at the sight of all those stolen supplies stacked up neat and deliberate in the dark. The second officer moved toward Silas with his handcuffs already out. Silas did not resist. He put his wrists together and let himself be taken hold of. He looked at Jack one last time as the cuffs clicked into place. His face gave away nothing, but his eyes said he understood that something had finally caught up with him. Jack stepped aside and let them lead him out. The ambulance came just before sunrise. Its headlights cut two pale lines through the early morning dark as it rolled down the narrow dirt road toward the old farmhouse. The red and white lights on its roof turned slowly, but silently. No siren, just that quiet, steady spin of color across the trees, and the fence posts and the dry grass. Ellie stood on the porch in her bare feet and watched it come. She had her arms wrapped tight around herself, her small fingers gripping the sleeves of her worn cotton shirt. Her hair was loose and tangled from a night she had not really slept through. She had been awake most of it, listening to her mother breathe, counting the seconds between each exhale the way she had started doing without meaning to. Jack stood just behind her, close enough to be there, far enough to give her room. The ambulance stopped in the yard and two people climbed out quickly, a man and a woman, both in dark uniforms, moving with the kind of calm purpose that comes from doing urgent things so many times it no longer shows on your face. They pulled a stretcher from the back and carried their bags inside without wasting a single step. Ellie did not go in right away. She just watched the door. Jack put a hand gently on her shoulder. "Your mama's going to get real help now," he said. "That's a good thing." Ellie nodded. She knew it was good. She did. But knowing something and feeling it were two different things. And right now, her chest felt like it was full of cold water. Inside, voices moved back and forth, soft words she could not fully make out. The sound of equipment, a zipper on a bag, the squeak of the stretcher wheels on the old wood floor. Then they brought her mother out. Mrs. Walker lay on the stretcher with a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes half open. She turned her head slowly when she reached the porch and found Ellie standing there. She lifted one hand. Ellie crossed the porch in 3 fast steps and took it. Her mother's fingers were cool and dry, but they squeezed back. Not hard, but enough. "I'm going to be okay," Mrs. Walker said. Her voice came out rough and quiet, like it had been worn down. "You did good, baby. You did so good." Ellie pressed her lips together and nodded. She did not trust herself to say anything back. They loaded her mother into the ambulance carefully. One of the paramedics turned to Jack and said something low about the nearest hospital being 40 minutes out. Jack nodded and said he would follow. Ellie climbed in beside her mother without asking. Nobody stopped her. The ride was long and quiet. The ambulance swayed gently on the uneven road before it hit the paved highway and smoothed out. Ellie sat in the narrow seat beside the stretcher and held her mother's hand the whole way. The paramedic on the other side worked steadily, checking readings, adjusting things, writing on a small clipboard. She had a kind face. She glanced at Ellie once and gave her a small, reassuring smile. Ellie tried to smile back. At the hospital, everything moved fast. People in scrubs met them at the door. Words flew back and forth above Ellie's head. Her mother was wheeled away through a set of swinging doors before Ellie could hold on any longer. She stood in the hallway and watched those doors stop swinging. Jack appeared beside her a few minutes later. He had driven hard to get there. His jacket was still on, his boots loud on the shiny floor. He looked at her face, and then he sat down in one of the plastic chairs along the wall and waited without saying a word. Ellie sat down next to him. They stayed like that for a long time. Hours passed. A doctor came out once to ask questions, and Jack answered what he could. A nurse brought Ellie a small cup of apple juice and a pack of crackers without being asked. Then, late that afternoon, the doctor came back. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm, and he was not rushing. His face was tired but settled. He sat down in the chair across from them and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Her fever is broken. he said. "She's stable. Her body is responding to the treatment." Ellie heard the words. She heard every one of them. Her fever has broken. She's stable. Something loosened in Ellie's chest. Like a knot that had been pulled tight for so long she had forgotten what it felt like without it. Her eyes filled up fast, and she blinked hard. But it did not help much. Jack exhaled slowly beside her. It was the kind of breath a person holds for a very long time before they finally let it go. "Can I see her?" Ellie asked. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. The doctor nodded. "In a little while. She's resting now. But yes." He looked at Ellie with steady, gentle eyes. "You can see her." The news moved through the village the way all real news does in a small town. Not through newspapers. Not through official announcements. It moved through screen doors, left open on warm afternoons, through conversations at the feed store counter, through two women talking quietly in the market aisle while they thought nobody was listening. By the second day, after Silas Rook was taken away in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, almost everyone in the village knew something had happened. By the third day, they were starting to understand what it actually meant. The retired sheriff's widow, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Harlan, made sure of that. She was not the kind of person who waited for others to do the necessary thing. She was 71 years old, walked with a slight hitch in her left hip, and had spent 30 years married to a man who believed that truth told plainly was always better than truth told late. She had learned it well. She went door to door herself, carried a folder of papers that the nurse, Clara, had helped her put together. Photos of the note found in Ellie's food bag. A handwritten list of households that had reported missing medicines over the past several months. A timeline that showed how those disappearances always happened within a few days of someone in town getting sick enough to need help. Mrs. Harlan knocked on every door that mattered. Some people opened wide. Some cracked the door only a few inches, suspicious and ashamed at the same time. But she stood on every porch, as long as it took, speaking in that plain, unhurried way of hers, and she let the papers do the rest of the talking. By the fourth day, people could not look away anymore. Dale Grover, who ran the feed store and had told two different people that Jack Morrison was probably behind the thefts, stood in front of his store in the afternoon light with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Clara walked past him on her way to check on a patient, and he stopped her. "I got it wrong," he said. Just like that. No preamble. Clara stopped and looked at him. "About the biker," Dale said. "I was wrong about him." Clara nodded once. "He was here protecting people, Dale, while the rest of us were scared to even say Silas Rook's name out loud." Dale looked down at his boots. He did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. Over at the market, the young store clerk named Tommy had quietly pulled out the record he had kept of every unusual purchase, every strange request, every time Silas had come in asking about who in town was receiving supply deliveries for sick households. He had been afraid to say anything for months, afraid of what Silas might do, afraid nobody would believe a 19-year-old kid over a man who had never technically been caught doing anything. He brought the records to Mrs. Harlan on the fifth day. She sat at her kitchen table, read every page carefully, and then looked up at him. "This matters," she said. "Every word of this matters." Tommy let out a breath he looked like he had been holding for a long time. Small things started shifting after that. The kind of small things that do not look like much on their own, but add up to something real when you step back and look at them together. A neighbor, 2 roads over from the Walker farmhouse, dropped off a covered dish at the door without knocking. Just left it on the step with a folded note that said simply, "We should have done more sooner." 2 men from the far end of town showed up at another household on Silas's list and replaced a window latch that had been broken for months. Nobody had asked them to come. The nurse organized a quiet check-in of every home that had been targeted, making sure medicines were restocked and nobody had been left without what they needed. The village was not healed, not even close. But it was beginning to move in the right direction, one honest step at a time. 1 week passed. Jack stayed. He did not make a big announcement about it. He did not explain himself to anyone who asked. He simply did not leave. Each morning he was up before the sun, moving quietly through whatever needed doing. And by the time most people in the village were stirring awake, he had already been useful for hours. The Walker farmhouse had a fence line on the eastern side that had been leaning for months. 3 posts had rotted at the base, leaving long gaps where the boards sagged toward the ground. Jack pulled every bad post himself, cut new ones from a pile of spare lumber he found stacked behind the barn, and set them straight in fresh dug holes packed tight with gravel and soil. He worked without rushing, steady and quiet, the way he did most things. Ellie watched him from the porch steps. She had a habit of following him at a careful distance, not close enough to be in the way, but close enough to see everything. She would sit with her chin resting on her knees and watch his hands work, the way the mallet came down clean and even, the way he checked each post with his eye before moving to the next one. Sometimes she asked questions. "How do you know if the post is straight?" she asked one morning. Jack did not stop working. "You trust what you can see," he said. "You step back. Look at it from a distance. If something's off, you can feel it before you can even explain it." Ellie thought about that for a moment. "Like how I knew something was wrong on the road that day." Jack set the mallet down and looked at her. "Exactly like that," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching. He also helped in town. Clara had been running herself thin, trying to keep up with the recovery visits across the village. Several households that Silas had targeted were still trying to get back on their feet, missing supplies that had never been replaced, small repairs that had gone undone because the people inside were too sick or too tired to manage them. Jack drove her in his truck to 3 different homes that week. He carried boxes. He fixed a water pump that had seized up at an elderly man's property on the edge of town. He replaced a broken step at another house where a woman with 2 small children had been afraid to use the front door for weeks. He did not say much at any of these places. He did not try to make people feel comfortable around him. He just worked and let the work speak for itself. Some people thanked him directly. Some did not. He treated both the same. Mrs. Harlan stopped by the Walker farmhouse on the 6th day. She stood near the fence line and watched Jack working for a moment before she said anything. "The town owes you an apology," she said. Jack kept working. "Town doesn't owe me anything." "Maybe not," she said, "but it's going to give you one anyway, whether you want it or not." He glanced at her then. There was the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. On the evening of the 7th day, Ellie's mother sat up in bed for the first time without needing help. She moved slowly, carefully, but she sat up on her own and stayed that way. Clara had been by that afternoon and said the color was coming back, said the fever had finally broken for good. Ellie brought her a cup of warm broth and sat beside her on the edge of the cot, close enough that their shoulders touched. Jack was outside on the porch, the last of the evening light going orange across the fields. He heard the screen door push open behind him, and then small footsteps crossing the boards. Ellie stood beside him. She looked out at the same light he was looking at. "Thank you, Hawk," she said quietly. Just that. Nothing more. Jack looked down at her. His chest felt full in a way that was hard to name. 1 month later, the village felt different. It was hard to say exactly when the shift happened. It was not one single moment. It was more like the way a field looks after a long rain. Slowly, quietly, everything green again. The market stayed open later now. Mrs. Pell, who ran the dry goods counter, had started propping the front door open in the mornings to let the fresh air in. She said it made the place feel friendlier. People agreed. More of them came in just to talk, not only to buy, and that was new. The dirt road that cut through the center of town had been graded smooth by a small crew of volunteers, who showed up one Saturday morning with shovels and a borrowed grader. Nobody organized it officially. People just came. Jack was among them, working a long-handled rake through the loose soil without being asked. Silas Rook was gone from the village. The authorities had taken him the night of the farmhouse, and the word that came back through proper channels was that he would not be returning. The list found in the food bag, the stolen medicines, the intimidation of sick families, it had all been documented carefully. Mrs. Harlan had made sure of that personally. She had sat across a table from the investigators and laid out every piece of evidence with the calm precision of a woman who had spent decades beside a lawman and knew exactly what mattered. The families Silas had targeted were slowly rebuilding. It was not fast. Some of them had lost more than supplies. Some had lost weeks of health, months of trust, a sense of safety that takes time to grow back. But they were not rebuilding alone. Clara organized a weekly supply run that circled through the households that were still recovering. The young store clerk, Tommy, donated time every Thursday afternoon to help deliver. The retired school teacher 2 streets over began checking in on the elderly residents every morning during her walk. Small things, steady things, the kind of things that hold a community together when you actually look. Jack moved through all of it the same way he always had. Quietly, without ceremony. He had taken a room above the old hardware store on the eastern end of Main Street. Nothing fancy. A bed, a window, a place to hang his jacket. The owner, a big-shouldered man named Dell, had offered it at a fair price and not asked any questions beyond the practical ones, which Jack respected. His bike sat parked out front each night and was gone most mornings. People had stopped flinching when they saw it. That itself felt like something. On this particular evening, the sky above the village went the color of warm copper as the sun moved low behind the tree line. The air had cooled just enough to make the walk pleasant, and the fields on either side of the road glowed with it. Ellie walked beside her mother along the familiar dirt road. Mrs. Walker moved slowly but steadily. Her arm looped through Ellie's. She was still thin from the long illness, still careful with her steps, but she was upright, and she was moving under her own strength. She had her face tilted slightly upward, the way a person does when they are taking in warmth they almost lost. Ellie was talking. Her voice came in and out on the light breeze. Something about a bird she had seen near the fence that morning, something about the color of its wings. Her mother laughed softly at something she said. It was such a simple sound, easy and real, the way a mother's laugh is supposed to sound. Jack stood near the edge of the road, a little back from it, leaning against the worn wooden post of a split-rail fence. He watched them pass in that golden light, the woman and her girl, walking home safe and easy in the world. His hands rested loose at his sides. The tightness he had carried in his chest for so many years, that old, familiar weight, was quiet now. He watched until they turned at the bend in the road and disappeared from sight. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.